The collisions at sea became increasingly dangerous. One Icelandic officer died after such a collision, but by a combination of sheer luck and skillful seamanship, there had been no other losses. But on the 6th of May, 1976, the rules of engagement changed. The Royal Navy were given orders to carry out full protection.
Up until that evening, at about 7 o'clock, the rules as far as the British warships were concerned were very restricted, and we'd been told to do the job as best we could, but not in any way to get in a position where we would be damaged. That's our own ships would be damaged. Well, this made it really going into battle with your hands and feet tied together, and you really couldn't do anything.
Þetta voðalegt ástand að vera hermaður á velvopnuðu skipi og láta sem björgunarskipi angra sig.
And then at 7 o'clock on May the 6th, the change in the rules came through to say that we were now allowed to carry out full protection and to ensure that the frigates did their job. There was the possibility they might get damaged in doing it. We made it absolutely clear to each of the gunboats there that the rules had changed.
Og þá voru allir hættir togarana og við vorum að fara yfir svæði og enginn að fiska. Svo allt í einu kallar loftskiptamaðurinn í mig og segir að það einn að fiska fyrir framan okkur. Ertu viss það, segir ég. Já, ég er viss það. Hann er á 3,5 míla ferð og við tökum stefnuna á þangað og þeir voru rétt fyrir aftan okkur á Falmouth.
Tia was the vessel I was marking, and she suddenly decided she'd go after one of the trawlers with her cutter down. And having a cutter down, it's quite clear that she only had one action in mind, and that was to cut the trawl of the trawler. So I closed in on the port quarter, about 100 feet away, 30, 40 degrees behind, so that she couldn't hit me, whichever way she turned, and sounded a short blast and hoping that she would veer to starboard to keep away from the trawler. But she didn't, and a minute later I sounded again and then turned to starboard and hit her in the port quarter.
Ég var nýkominn í koju og var ekki sofnaður, búinn að vera eitthvað lengi á löppum. Svo var ég allt í einu bara kominn upp á vegg úr kojunni, bara líka á þilinu. Sem djöfullinn sjálfur, það ekki svefnfriður fyrir þessum mönnum.
Og kemur svona á mitt þyrlutilfarið og yfir vélarrúminu, þannig ef hann hefði kætt gat þar þá voru náttúrulega grunar það, hann ætlaði að gera það, þá voru búin að vera, þá hefði vélarnar stoppað.
We had this awful incident where she heeled right over to starboard and then came round port side to port side, which was quite horrific and quite horrible.
Þá hringi ég niður í vélarrúm og spurði hvort það sé allt í lagi þar. Já, segja hann, það er smáleiki en það er hitt, það er ekki keyst.
And I hoped that no one had been thrown over the side, so I asked the captain if anyone had been thrown over the side, and he said, I don't want any help from you.
Skipið það snýrist alveg 180 gráður, snýrist alveg við og þá sé ég togarann hérna rétt hjá okkur og ég setja fulla ferð því klippurnar voru úti.
So having unwound myself and got myself into gear again, I took up the same position on the port quarter of the Tia as she approached another trawler with her cutter down.
Það svona 5 mínútur þá er ég búinn að klippa án trollið. Þá hann alveg hinn trítilóð eins og ég þú vel skilið það.
I did the same routine, sounded a short blast, waited a minute or so, sounded again, waited again, and sounded the third time before I turned to starboard and hit her in the same place.
Hann keyrir þarna nákvæmlega eins og við fórum á hliðina og þegar við komum upp úr þeirri dífu þá verðum við varir við það stoppuðum báða vélarnar þegar fóru á hliðina. Það er eitthvað annar í vélinni.
Fortunately, no one was hurt, no one was killed, and no one, there was no damage done to people. And at the end of that, it appeared the 4 gunboats then decided that they would retire. And that appeared to me to be virtually the end of the Cold War, at least the end of the Cold War up there.
Mrs. Leander, have you got any casualties at the moment?
No, and thank God for that.
The previous month, the Labour Party under Jim Callaghan had been elected to government in Britain. Anthony Crosland, an MP for Grimsby, was appointed Foreign Secretary. He was given the difficult task of ending the Cod Wars.
Það voru stöðugar samningaumleitanir í gangi og það var verið að vinna þessum málum bak við tjöldin. Ég held nú að Bretar hafi líka verið búin að fá sig fullsadda af þessu stríði við okkur Íslendinga.
And Tony Crosland sensibly took the view that this was an absurd dispute. And even though he was Member of Parliament for Grimsby, he was prepared to concede more to stop the Cod War going on.
When he became Foreign Secretary, I just went to him and said, "Do you want a deal? The deal's been arrived." He said, "I haven't seen it." Sent for it. He sent for the deal. He went, got Friedel in Norway, and the deal then was negotiated. It was less than what I came back with, but at least it was a deal, and based on the deal I brought back from the Iceland government.
Well, a lot of people won't like it, but I've warned people in Grimsby for some time that because of the whole universal movement to a 200-mile limit, that the position of the Grimsby fishing industry was going to change and that we would see a decline in the distant water part of the fleet, although we shall certainly see a very large increase in the inshore and near water part. So I think that, I'm perfectly content to go down to Grimsby and defend this, even though it will be unpopular with some parts of my constituency.
The agreement was signed in Oslo on the 2nd of June 1976. It ended distant water fishing in Britain. The devastation was summed up by Tom Nielsen of the British Trawler Owners Federation. In an interview with the Icelandic press, he said, "You have won a great victory, and that I don't want to take away. The sad thing is that you've put a hell of a lot of hard-working and good fishermen out of work."
I was told once by a government minister that fishing was 1% of the total British manufacturing output. Fishing was 1%. So what chance did we have when we was just 1%? They didn't care a hell about us.
They were promised by the government that there would be compensation. They were promised they would have retraining. They were promised help with development so that new industries would come in diversification of the local economy. And very little of that was actually fulfilled because it was then found or thought that the fishermen were casual workers and not entitled to redundancy because the renewed their contract on each trip. This was the argument. It wasn't true as it turned out.
The trawler owners were paid £32 million in compensation. The trawlers were then tied up, scrapped, or sold to other countries.
I'm not critical of the owners for getting the decommissioning money. They did lose a loss of revenue. But what's about the poor? The deckhands and the crews? They never got a penny. When our involvement with Iceland, fishing-wise, when it ceased, that was the end of an era in Hull.
Promises made by the British government to the fishing communities were not kept. Thousands of families lost their livelihoods overnight. So in 1983, the British Fishermen's Association was formed to fight for compensation and redundancy payments.
These are men, ex-trawlermen, typing out letters with 2 fingers on a typewriter, doing it all for themselves, not helped by government, not helped by the trade union movement. having to do it all for themselves. So yeah, I think governments of various persuasions are to blame for this current situation.
Over the years, we've written to the Queen. Prince Philip has been written to, but obviously they state it's not a matter for the palace, so they redirect it. We wrote to Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister some years ago. We wrote to John Major, and we've also written to Tony Blair.
In July 2000, the persistence of the ex-fishermen and the local MPs paid off. 25 years after the Oslo Agreement, £26 million was earmarked as compensation for those who lost their livelihoods in the Cod Wars.
British foreign policy is full of occasions when we've withdrawn from things. Normally we kill a lot of people first. There may be an example in history where we have withdrawn, retreated, capitulated in the way we did over the fishing dispute, but I can't think of one. That doesn't mean we were wrong to do it. It just means it's historically unique.
The Hull docks were a sad sight.
Þegar maður gekk fram hjá tugum skipa sem búið var að leggja við landfestar til varanlega, að þá upplifði maður og upplifði ég að við hlytum að hafa valdið þessu fólki miklum skaða. Og mér var þetta hvatning til þess að við þyrftum að gera okkur grein fyrir því, að hafandi staðið fyrir því og átt hluta því, að þeim var ýtt af okkar miðum og þeir eru að leggja sínum skipum, að við erum að gæta sóknarinnar í okkar fiskistofna og gæta þess að það veri aldrei gert of frekar á þann veg að þeir byggðust upp og eldust og framtíðin og íslensk ungmenni gætu notið þess á efri árum og alltaf framvegis að fiskistofnarnir við Ísland væri í góðu ásigkomulagi og gætu þolað eðlilega sókn.